James is going to do the talk because I'm not feeling well. I have a headache and stuff. But I'll say I watched this movie and it was very hard for me to watch because I felt so sorry for this man. His 21 years of his life was taken away from him, and then he finds a baby in a dumpster, and then he reads up that he's not allowed to keep the baby. It would be considered kidnapping, and all he wanted to do was help. But anyway, I felt very sorry for him, and it's a sad story. But
is it based on real life, or it's just a sad story? Okay. Anyway, sometimes those are the hardest to take, right?
And Ethan Hawke did a great job.
He usually does. He's
a good actor. Undeclared, the complete series. Now, I didn't actually enjoy this.
Me too. I was a bit surprised because
there's so much talent in it. So much.
Yeah. And it's not their fault. They're young, you know. Seth Rogen might be 20-something in this, like young 20 something. But I think it's the writing, wouldn't you say? Maybe the concept. Anyway, I was kind of surprised when I saw Seth Rogen. He almost never fails to. He never disappoints, you know. But in this one, he's not enough to. He is pretty good. Like, I get half baked just watching it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So.
James always says the camera loves him.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So comfortable.
Yeah, you know, the camera just sits lightly on him. That's for sure. There are a lot of people that. Loudon Wainwright is in this, and I know him from a song way back in about 1973 called "Dead Skunk in the Middle of the Road." He's the dad of Rufus Wainwright. Now, he's gotten way better than your typical soap opera actor, but you can see that he's just not quite as... He's playing a different character than Seth Rogen, so not nearly as comfortable in front of the camera. He probably would be if he had a guitar in his lap. So it goes. Anyway, it's kind of nice seeing him. You know, I always liked Loudon Wainwright. Always made me laugh. I liked his laughing song. Ha ha ha, guffaw, guffaw. You know, it has giggle, giggle, stuff like that. That was kind of like the chorus line. So I like that pretty good.
So James is eating broccoli soup that I made based on the recipe from that Rocky Mountain cookbook.
Broccoli soup, and it's what it should be called. It's Rocky Mountain. Anyway, it's pretty good. I put in a lot of garlic in there. I'm going to be smelling like garlic for the rest of today, but that's the way it goes because I got to finish it up from early this morning.
And he's also eating bread that I made.
This is awesome bread. Look at how regular it looks. I'm telling you.
It's a bread maker. So the bread maker, that one's makes the round loaves, which is great for if you want to make personal pan pizzas. Makes a perfect slice for that.
There you go. You know, and you can put bologna slices on.
Whatever.
Not that you
want.
ever would want to ruin a good piece of bread like that. Were you saying there's a lot of teff in this?
Half teff. So what
exactly is teff? Can you explain it to people out there?
It's actually, I think it's the smallest grain in the world.
Okay.
So it's a tiny little thing.
Yeah.
They're just little specks.
So it makes for a real thick loaf, because it fits into the pieces a lot better.
So with teff, you don't have to grind it. I mixed in, it's half teff, which I soaked and sprouted a little bit. And that didn't take long. You just soak it, and then you rinse and just leave it wet and covered.
About how long? Couple of days?
Couple of days. Yeah. And so then I mixed in organic rye flour and what else?
Stuff the bugs would like. It's real flour. There we go.
And some whole wheat flour too.
There we go.
And
it's going to be good for my cancer, because that's what that one doctor who kind of looks as though he kept brain cancer at bay for 15 years. That's one of the things he recommended, actually. He recommended avoiding refined flour, but he did recommend whole wheat, grain products, bread and stuff like that. I was a bit surprised, but he said, stuff like this. So cancer will be fleeing,
I don't.
cruciferous veggies.
I don't think it's too good to be eating a whole lot of that stuff.
Well, I don't eat a lot of it anymore. I mean, I used to be able to, when I was a kid and really, really active, I could eat half a loaf easily.
All right.
Okay, so music is a mirror of history. So this guy is a music historian in residence with San Francisco Performances. And what performances? His
This is
lectures
the best
are
one
performances.
that I've seen him do, and we've watched
Yeah.
quite a few of his great courses now.
Yeah.
And
So this guy kind of almost like dances when he's doing his lectures and things like that.
Yes, it's a performance each
Yeah,
time.
yeah, it's amazing. And he reads quotes with such verve, it's incredible. I think they're better than the original quotes. But the history stuff, well, I
I'm
don't know.
enjoying it like crazy. I think.
Well, it's good to fit stuff. It doesn't matter if it's science or art or the humanities. It's good to fit the stuff into history because people
it's very
don't know history.
entertaining, and you got to get history to people somehow.
It's
I
amazing
can't
how little
imagine
people know
anybody
about
getting
history.
it to people better than him.
Yeah,
honestly.
and the big trouble is, there are people who actually know history, and unfortunately, they generally have lots of grievances, and they want to get back at people and stuff like that. So when people don't know history, they say ignorance is bliss. Well, what I say is ignorance is bliss until it hits you upside the head, and or the backside of the head. So people don't know history. At any rate, this guy, there are a couple of spots where I kind of had a little trouble with what he was
House
saying.
sparrow over there.
House
Do you see
sparrow.
him?
Over where?
Just looks
Okay.
straight where I'm looking.
Oh, he's in the lilac
Yeah.
bush. He's hopping around. Yeah, he's like Boppin' Robin. What was that song that Michael Jackson covered? It's a 50s song. Rockin' Robin. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it's
he's bopping
interesting.
along
I
like
don't
a rockin'
often
Robin.
get the house sparrows in that lilac. Usually
is that
it's
true?
the chickadees.
Yeah.
They come over
Yeah.
and they look in the window
Yeah.
and they look at me and
Yeah.
they look at my artwork that I'm doing. They're
Yeah.
like, "What are you
They
doing
like the
today?"
colors, I think.
I don't know what they're,
Yeah.
but they're always interested in what I'm doing. They're looking.
I
in the
think
window.
they recognize a kindred soul. They're not. I don't think of them as being predators. We're not predatory, so I think they recognize it. They like watching us eat. I think they're hoping, that I'm going to leave some grains and stuff like that. To a large extent, animal behavior is controlled by food. So oftentimes you'll be wondering why dogs do the things that they do, and I'm not saying even most of the time it comes down to food, but a lot of the time it does come down to food. I think it's birds. That cat that sits and watches us do these blog presentations or whatever you call them, he's waiting for some. He or she is waiting for some.
What could that cat be eating? Or
Well, hoping for some meat. I don't know. Anyway.
I'm waiting a long time. for
Well,
that.
every so occasionally I'll have fish out here, so that would be a major league. Cats don't forget; they're a bit like elephants that way. So. Anyway, so this guy's talking about the Turks, and it's what is it? The something out of the Seraglio or out of the Harem by Mozart. So it'd be done, I think, something like 1781, and Mozart died, I think, 1791. So it's sometime in the decade before he died. And I think it was his first big, at least successful opera, Mozart. Maybe it was the first successful German one. He did some Italian, so don't you know. And this guy's, there's a Turkish dude portrayed in here. He's fat, he's portrayed as being greasy, he's got a big harem and stuff like that. There's got to be a harem. It's in the title of the opera. The way this guy's talking about it is there has to be a harem because it's Turks, and that's part of a stereotype. And the thing is, the Turkish leaders had a stereotype that they lived up to. That culture is a stereotype. And if you go making fun of Nazis, then Mozart's making fun of this guy, the librettist, making fun of this Turkish official, say Pasha or something like that. If you make fun of Nazi officials, that's okay. They're not nice people. And here's the deal. He's saying, the Europeans, and it includes Mozart here, they were othering. He doesn't exactly use that term, but this is the concept. They're othering their enemies. And this enemy thing was going on for 400 years between the Turks and the Europeans. The Turks were sitting in Europe. They were colonizers. They were imperializers. They deserved this image of being nasty. They had no right to be in Europe. If you look where the Turks come from in terms of geography, this is a Turkic people. It's not just the Turks. But where you look where they come from in terms of geography and in terms of linguistics, here's what linguists say. Their language is related to Mongolians and Manchurians. The Manchurians are located in the northeastern part of China. That's where Manchuria is, but they're not native to there. They come from north of there. If you probably did an analysis, strictly speaking, of geography, you'd find out that the Turks, like the Hungarians, came from the northern part of Siberia on the Arctic coast. That's, strictly speaking, where they belong. Now, I'm not telling them to go back there or anything like that, but there has to be an understanding that when they end up in Europe, they don't belong there. They are imperializers/colonizers. They're not just imperializers like the way the English were in India. They were colonizers in the sense that they moved colonists in there and they moved their cult in there. Do you hear the similarity between cult and colony and culture and cultivation? They're all related. You take over the land and you cultivate. You bring your cult in. You bring colonists in. When you do that, and people make fun of your imperialization and colonization, guess what? You deserve it. When the Europeans, when Mozart, his librettist, is making fun of this dude here, it's not now. The Europeans were still in the process of trying to get the Turks to decolonize and de-imperialize. They were still trying to do it. So less than 100 years before this, if I've got the date right, in 1781, 1683, the Turks were hurled back from the gates of Vienna, and it wasn't the people of Vienna that were able to free them. It was a guy called Jan Sobieski from Poland who brought the blow. And understand, most of these battles over Vienna's in Central Europe. It's not even Eastern Europe. However you want to categorize it. There's Germans there. However you want to categorize it. They were outnumbered by these Turkish hordes. They were being picked on. This is not the present day. It's not the so-called colonial era where Europeans were going around the world and stuff like that. The Europeans had made it to the New World by then, and they did some major league colonization. But that is not what was happening now. Up until my granddad's time, the Turks were in Europe, southeastern Europe, in a big, big way. Multiple countries. And some of these countries weren't, strictly speaking, they didn't get independence. I don't want to call it freed because it didn't really end up with anything like democracy. But freed from Turkish hegemony. There's a fancy word for you fake left-wingers out there. You're constantly using it, abusing it, and overusing and misusing it. Some of these countries weren't freed until, basically World War I. That's almost my dad's lifetime, and he's still alive. He's still alive. So, what this dude is doing is he's a nice dude. and all this. He's trying to be nice and all that stuff. He's retrojecting stuff, colonial stuff, now to back then. The bad dudes back then for colonizing in this area were the Turks, and they deserve to be made fun of. And guess what? You know, there's a white woman in this harem. Okay, is that like a stereotype? No, it's not. You know, like the Tatars, who are Turkic kind of people, who some of them were located in the Crimean Peninsula. They don't have a native right to that area. They're still there. They don't have a native right to that area. What they would do is they'd go off on little expeditions. They were tourists, big tourists, and they'd go into the rest of the Ukraine, and into Russia, and into Belarus, and into Poland. And you know, in the space of 250 years, so I think that's roughly between 1500 and 1750. 1750 is within a generation of when this thing was done. They took, in the space of those 250 years, according to one source that I've run across, I don't know how sober it is, but I think it's reasonably reliable, 2.5 million slaves. That's from Russia, the Ukraine, Belarus, and Poland. And some of those slaves, you see, like the women in a harem, some of them would be wives of Turks, but that'd be legal. The rest would be concubines. And what are concubines? They're sex slaves. So, is that a stereotype? No, it's not. That's actually what happened. That's actually what happened. And it would still be current. There'd still be people in these seraglios and stuff like that, or harems, that would have been taken as slaves from European countries. So, you know, he was behaving as acting. This professor was acting as though that's made up. A white woman never end up in a harem. They ended up in harems. Lots of them. 2.5 million slaves. And understand, on these raiding expeditions, they weren't that thrilled about guys. You know, like they were different from the European type. They loved women slaves. The guys, oftentimes, they tended to just whack them. You know what I'm saying? So that's the way it goes. I gather the majority of slaves taken were women. What were they taken for? Well, they'd be doing some domestic chores. But unfortunately, some of the domestic chores, domestic means around the house. The Latin root is dom, which kind of means house, or household. And, you know, the slavery was 24/7, 52. And the important thing is 24. You know, in the living room, in the kitchen, and yes, in the bedroom. So there you go. That's I took exception to that, and understand he was basing that on a dude who'd written something on that part of the world, the Middle East, a guy called Daniel or something like that. That's his last name. And yeah, it was. You can tell it's a whitewash and stuff like that. So, you know, this is the important thing about history. You got to have something like historicity. You can't be retrojecting values back on people back then based on today's sorts of things. The situation in the Middle East nowadays is very different from what was back then. The bad dudes were the Turks, or some of the baddest dudes. Everyone was bad back then, but the baddest dudes, pretty well, in that area of the world were Turks. You know, make fun of them. I believe in making fun of them.